All right, there we go. So we have Mike Borstad in front of you, and most of you know Mike. Thought it would be good for us to have an update, a ministry update. And I will remind the congregation again that all of those letters that Mike and Sherry send us get posted on the window on the way out the door. So be sure and stop and look at their latest letter on your way out today. But I'll be asking the same questions, Mike, that I've been asking generally anyway, our other guests on Sunday morning, and that is just kind of a ministry update. What are some of the joys, first of all, that you're seeing, and then we can get to some prayer requests right now after that. But what are some of the things that you're observing God doing with Cardone, and just the things you and Sherry are doing now?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. I want to say hello to everybody because Providence is a really special place for us, full of really special people. And so just a big hello from myself and from Sherry, who's not able to be with me right at this moment. But yeah, so thanks for asking. So I think like most of us, 2020 turned things upside down for many people, and for us, perhaps not so much on the personal level, but on the ministry level, because I had, when all the travel restrictions came into place in 2020, I had scheduled trips to Colombia, to Guatemala, and to Bolivia, and to Argentina, and they all got canceled. So we were asking, well, what are we doing? And when that happens, you do question. You say, well, God, why is this happening? And so one of the things that we prayed about is especially moving into 2021, and particularly from, say, February to April, was, is there going to be anything for us in the future, or is this kind of the end of the road? And what's really exciting is that on two different levels, really three different levels, we started to, as we prayed, we really saw God working. And one of the levels was that some of my students that I had in Colombia I started having more contact with them, particularly with a student who's starting a church in Venezuela. And a lot of you know about the problems in Venezuela. So it's been really, he's faithfully serving the Lord, went back there and is starting a church. And so it's been a joy to be able to continue to not only have had him as a student, but to continue to be in contact with him. And then another student who's working with a church start on a city in Colombia that's right on the border with Venezuela. So it's full of refugees from Venezuela, because Venezuela is in such a terrible crisis right now. And so those two students, the first one I mentioned who's in Venezuela is named Lemuel, like King Lemuel in Proverbs 31. And the other one is named Melvin. Say Melvin, that doesn't sound very Spanish. Well, Colombia has all kinds of English names. So you'll have a student called Nelson, and I've got another student called Kevin that I've been in touch with. The last names are always Spanish, but in any event, so just joys. So that started to happen. God gave me the opportunity to be involved with them, to do some mentoring, even at a distance, as they, having graduated, are starting ministry. And in the case of two of them, just got married after seminary, and so the joy of seeing that as well. And then the other was that I was wondering if I was going to get to teach this year at all, and the Lord opened up the door, so I was actually able to teach a class via computer on Introduction to the Old Testament. I did that in April. And then another one opened up, teaching methods of Bible study to the seminary that I was involved with in Argentina for many years. So I'm currently doing that every other week. And again, another very, very pleasant surprise. And now an opportunity to also to teach at a distance at a church in Colombia. So it's not as, in my mind, it's not as good as being able to travel, but it's a real blessing. And then the third level of blessing is that the questions we had, well, is there any future, is being answered, because we're seeing, so for next year, I actually already have, even though we're still only halfway through 2021, there's already opportunities. I'm already set up to teach in Mexico City and in Colombia. And I think there'll probably be 2 or 3 more classes that I'll be doing with the Reformed Theological Seminary in Colombia, in Medellin, Colombia. And then of course there's Argentina. And I think Argentina is very closed right now. It's very difficult. In fact, I really couldn't, even if I wanted to travel, I don't think it would work at this point. So, but I'm praying that next year that will open up again. So yeah, so there's some real joys there.
Thanks. Well, so we've got some praises, but some prayer requests mixed in, and probably a few more. And I primed you for this, but what are some challenges you're facing? Just when people see your face on the refrigerator or your prayer letter on the wall or get one of those emails, what are some things that would be burdens on you guys that we can pray about as a church and individual?
Yeah. Yes, there are some, and one of them is I'm rejoicing to see the Lord is really opening up the ministry again. Of course, we still don't really know exactly what will happen with travel next year. Actually, Colombia and Mexico are somewhat open. At least they were when I checked the State Department and went to some of the embassy web pages and stuff. A couple of weeks ago, they were open to travel if you had a test, a valid COVID test. They weren't asking for vaccines or anything like that, either in Mexico or Colombia. But that could change at any time. And one of the concerns that we've had as we look towards scheduling for the future is last year, if you weren't thinking about traveling, some of you say, well, I never travel overseas. But those of you that have, you want to have a certain degree of certainty that you'll be able to come back and when you go somewhere and you won't get locked in where you are. And that was a real issue last year. And it could be one of the things that we've learned about governments is that they make very fast and often arbitrary decisions. And so you might travel today and everything looks good and you have a 2-week stay planned, and a week into your stay, all of a sudden there's a announcement made and whoops, I'm stuck now, I can't travel.
Yeah.
They won't let me out, or they won't let me in, or they won't let me leave the province, which is what has happened a lot of times in Argentina. And there you are, and you are trying to pay for lodging and find food to eat, and you're running out of money. And so other missionaries that were actually overseas when this happened have had this. So I think, how do we want to plan for this? You can't really plan for it. So we're just seeking the Lord's wisdom and his guidance in that. And then just always the challenge of preparation. Since I'm bivocational right now, I'm doing quite a bit of handyman work. And so fortunately that gives me some flexibility, but I'm actually preparing 2 new courses, which they're 30-hour classes. So preparing 30 hours of class with assignments and homework is a lot of work. I'm probably looking at, for every time I prepare a course, somewhere from 120 to 180 hours of prep. So just prayer for that. It's a wonderful thing. I love doing it, but it's a challenge, and you got to squeeze it in. You got to be disciplined about it. And so I think that's a challenge. It's certainly something to pray about. And those would be, as far as the ministry, I think those would be the main things.
Okay, good. Thanks, Mike. You were prepared for this interview, so that is really helpful. Maybe we can even combine the last couple of questions, but just things God's been teaching you, and because we have a worship theme for starting at the end of July and then now through this month of August, just some challenges for our people regarding personal and corporate worship. What are some thoughts that way?
Yeah. So let's, I thought I would just, there's so much to be said about worship. And so I'm not going to give a seminar on worship, but I was thinking, I said to myself, when you asked that question, I said, just one big takeaway, what would that be? And so one big point, even though worship is a multifaceted theme with many truths that are really important. And so I decided to focus on this one. I'll just read a verse from, 2 verses from Jesus' conversation with the Samaritan woman at the well, which is in John 4. Um, I will, John chapter 4, verse 22, and then 22 through 24. Okay, so Jesus says there, you worship what you do not know. That's his challenge to her. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for such the Father seeks to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. I'm going to read the phrase I want to focus on one more time. The hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for such the Father seeks to worship him. For such the Father seeks to worship him. Such a profound thought. And the reason that came to me is that we can tend to be thinking of worship as something that we do, and it is something we do. Of course it is. Worship is active, and worship involves spiritual and mental preparation and physical preparation. We of course we are doing things, but it's easy to think of, because God is so big and we are so small, and because we are sinners and we're not worthy of entering into his presence, and for many, many reasons, and because even our desire for God is a desire that God works in us, and our faith is a faith that is the result not of our works, but as in Ephesians 2:8 and 9, the faith is of his grace. And so, and all of that is true, and yet Jesus says here something that might revolutionize our thinking. God seeks such to worship him. He is seeking worshipers. Now, God is, as we know, is not helpless in that. It's not that he hopes maybe somebody will come along and worship, and, well, I guess today nobody did. Well, that's too bad. That's not God's way of doing things. But yet, when God works, he works because he desires it with all of his heart. And it reminds me of when Jesus spoke to the disciples at the Last Supper. He said, I have longed to eat this supper with you. God has no needs, and yet God loves, he reaches out to, and he longs, he seeks for worshipers. And so if we come to worship believing that God actually wants to be worshiped, if we have that sense of expectancy, not that God is, well, maybe today he'll receive my worship. Well, no, maybe today God is just a little out of sorts, and he doesn't really want me to worship him. Maybe it'd be better if I just stayed away. But that is never the attitude that we have to take when we go to worship, because if God did not spare his own son, but gave himself up for us, how will he not with him freely give us all things? God is seeking to bless us in worship. So when we come, let's come with that sense of joy. Let's come with that sense of expectancy. And although we are to come with a legitimate fear of the Lord, because he is God and we are not, yet we are to come with that sense of knowing that we are adopted. We are beloved in his son. He loved his son, and he loves us in his son. And so when we come to worship, it is a warm and it is a welcoming God that seeks us to worship him. And so I think that's to come to worship in that, with that realization, is to come then open and not come defensively, and not say, oh boy, I'm really not a very good person, and I better kind of guard myself. Well, yeah, but we already knew that. And the fact that I'm not a good person, in fact, it's not just that I'm not a good person, I'm a justly condemned, I'm an evil person in myself. And yet in Christ, God sees me as holy. He sees me as perfect in his son. And so let's go to worship with that expectancy that God really wants to have us there. and wants us to worship him.
All right.
Anyway, that's my thought. I just thought that
Those are good thoughts. Thanks. I'll keep talking to you, but I'll pause the video now.